All right, without further ado, I am so excited to have this guy. We had some timing issues today, but we worked it out, and I'm so excited to talk to him about his new book. He is a senator. He is an activist. He has his own institute now, and he ran for president in 2008 and 2020. You know this guy. He needs no introduction. Please welcome to the show, Mike Gravel. Mike, how are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you about your new book. So I read your book, I guess about 2 months ago, and it's called The Failure of Representative Government and the Solution. And basically what goes on in this book is that we have this preconceived notion that only our elected lawmakers can make laws. And it turns out that's not entirely the case. So what's going on there?
Well, first off, there's a little complication in the book. I've switched publishers from Author House to Go To Publish, and so there may be sort of a burp when you try to buy it. You can, but I'm sure you can get it on any of the book locations, Amazon et al. So the book is The Failure of Representative Government. Now, what the book really points out is that the failure of representative government is all over. All you got to do is look around.
Sure.
It's self-evident. And the barrier to applying the changes that are recommended in the book is the Constitution itself. You know, we have such a hubristic reverence for the Constitution. Well, that's the wrong document. We need that reverence for the Declaration of Independence. It's the Declaration of Independence that had the moral character to go ahead and state that all human beings are created equal. Boy, that's not what the Constitution says. And in addition to that, the Declaration of Independence points out very accurately that the people have a right to change their government. Well, boy, that's not what the Constitution says, because there's no procedures in the Constitution to permit the people to change their government, because there's a monopoly in the Constitution so that the elites who control our society can perpetuate themselves with the existing Constitution. And then, of course, the Constitution set in motion 12 short years after the Declaration, set in motion the continuation of slavery for perpetuity. It took a civil war to correct that, but it wasn't really corrected. We were visited with the abuse that took place from the Civil War to the present day, and it's been a horrible abuse. I can't tell you how bad. When you go from decade to decade to decade, and lynching and the Uncle Toms, it really is appalling, and that's what's permitted in the Constitution. So little wonder we wake up today and the issue of Black Lives Matter is before us. Of course, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. But what we don't have in the present form of government is the ability to make those changes so that Black lives really do matter and is backed up by law. That's not what's going on today. And so that's what the book begins to grapple with. And the answer that the book offers is to break the monopoly that representatives have on lawmaking and the monopoly they have on the ability to change the Constitution, so that the people can do the same, can make laws and can alter the Constitution at will. And so the book literally is a manual on how to create and operate a legislature of the people. A legislature where you are a citizen can, with yourself or others, introduce legislation. It is deliberatively processed in the the people's legislature, and at the proper time, and it's processed in a way that far exceeds the existing processing that takes place in representative government. We have an appalling system that we think is great, and yet it's not. It's far from it. But we do set up a process that is great and is totally visible to all citizens on every single detail of the legislative process. And then when it comes time to vote on the issue, we have a process where we, for 1 week, in any location in the world, an American citizen can vote for a federal law, a state law, and a local law. That's what's put forth in detail in this book. The problem we have, Ron, is that we cannot proceed until the people understand their own power, and they don't now, not at all. We've been all hoodwinked by the elites who control our society, who have militarized our society, and there's nothing we can do but just tag along, unless people can acquaint themselves. That's why it's so critical for this book to become a bestseller. And we don't have the resources to make it a bestseller, but if enough people will read it, and I just had a very pleasant experience. A friend of ours, my wife and myself, who's in her 90s, I'm 90 years old now, and all of a sudden, and I probably gave her the book a year ago, she called and said, "I just read the book, and you are right on with the answer." So the problem is how do we get people to read the book? And Ron, what you're doing by advertising the book on this program and letting me talk about it is contributing in that regard.
Well, glad to do it. So just to be clear here, so there is basically, you're saying in the Declaration of Independence, there's clauses there that says we the people can basically enact our own laws. We don't need to just rely on Congress. We don't need to just rely on the Senate. We can just kind of have a gathering of citizens to enact our own laws, be it on the local, state, or federal level. Is that correct?
Very much so. In fact, I'm trying to dig out the section here where I can read it to you. Where is it? Well, you got the book there too.
I do.
Look under chapter. Let's see, the Constitution.
Is it maybe 3?
The founders. Oh no, here it is. I got it.
Oh, okay.
I'll just read it because it's that. I once rewrote the Declaration of Independence to make it germane, but I can't find that document. But we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Essentially, all human beings are created equal.
Mm-hmm.
That they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, now keep in mind, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Here, that's us. The power any government has, it has it as a result of our consent.
Yeah.
Okay?
It's right there.
Now, here's where it says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Now, that's not what the what the Declaration, I mean, with the Constitution says. The Constitution says that only elected officials in Article 5 can change the Constitution or make laws. But so which is the better document? Which is the document we should revere? We should be revering the Declaration of Independence and understanding the limitations that exist, substantial limitations that exist in the Constitution. Yet it's the Constitution that we swear fealty to defend from anybody and everybody. No, we need to be able to change the Constitution so that it does respond to what the Declaration of Independence says, which is the right of the people to abolish it. They're talking about the government. So that's the barrier. So what we need to do is to have people read the book and understand what it says by comparing the Declaration of Independence, which is the document we should revere, and not the Constitution. But it serves the interest of the elites and the people who control our society to drug the American people into a revering of the Constitution to the point of absurdity. And that's what we're doing. And so when you look at where's the problem right now to making some fundamental changes, the problem exists in the Constitution, which does not provide for the American people to make those changes. It leaves all that power in the hands of the elites who control our society. So we have a society, a government, a civilization that's ruled by a small minority, as opposed to the possibility of having our society governed by the majority. That's the task. And what the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence addresses is the majoritarian rule. What the Constitution addresses is minority rule. Now, until the Americans begin to grasp that difference, there's no chance that we'll be able to make any changes, because the elites, through the Constitution, will continue to hold us hostage to their power.
So, like, looking at it from an execution standpoint, like, what would be some ways? I mean, I know in the book you talk about like the idea of a gathering in Philadelphia or something like that, where people just gather to come up with policy. But what are some different ways you think we could orchestrate something like that, where we say, hey, look, we have these rights in the Declaration of Independence. We, the people, are no longer going to tolerate X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. And here's our proposed solution, and we are within our right to do this. Like what kind of?
Well, Ron, what it is you're slightly misunderstanding what's in the book.
Okay.
What's in the book is the fact that a group of individuals, they call themselves Philadelphia 2 because Philadelphia 1 was the convention.
Right.
We're now setting up a process to correct the failures of the Constitution. So we might as well call this group of people Philadelphia 2. Now, this is a group of people that just come together. They don't have to incorporate. They can operate under Robert's Rules of Order. And what they do is they take the legislative proposal in the book and present it first to the people to understand it. If the people don't understand it, there's not a prayer this will go forward. So first and foremost, the people have to understand what's involved. And that's what I was talking about, the difference between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So once they understand, now this group of people can begin to conduct an election, a national election. Now, what is an election? It's an assembly of people. Well, of course, the Declaration, the First Amendments to the Constitution talk in terms of our right to assemble, which means we can conduct an election. And what's the legitimacy of that election? The same legitimacy that was taken care of in Article 7 of the Constitution. And that legitimacy is that if the people vote and approve this this constitutional amendment and a Legislative Procedures Act, if they vote for that in sufficient numbers, then it becomes the law of the land, just as the voting for the nine conventions of 9 states voting for the ratification of the Constitution caused the 9 states to have the law of the land in the Constitution. Let me repeat that. If the people vote for, like, let's go back to how we created our government. In Article 7, which is the creation article, it says very simply in 2 lines that when the conventions of 9 states ratify the Constitution presented to them, it becomes the law of those 9 states. Now, that was in violation of the Articles of Confederation, which said that you had to have unanimous consent to make any changes. So the founders just pushed the Confederation aside and said, very simply, that if the conventions of 9 states voted to ratify the convention presented to them in these conventions, it's the law of that land. It's the law of those 9 states. Now, we can do the same thing. We can in fact, we can do it better. We don't have to go to conventions. The reason why they went to state conventions was to be able to protect slavery. They didn't want the people to get involved. Keep in mind, now the founders, at no time did they consult or permit the people to ratify the Constitution. It was done at state conventions. So now we can take a page from that book, which means it's self-actuating. That's what they did. They self-actuated their government by voting for it in conventions. Now, what we can do, because of today's technology, we can ask all Americans, do you want to become a lawmaker? And if the Americans say they do, then they would have to vote in sufficient numbers for a legislature of the people and a Legislative Procedures Act. These are 2 pieces of legislation that become legal because the American people vote at a certain standard for them. And that standard is very simple. The number of people who voted in the last presidential election, if they vote in a majority for this amendment and this Procedures Act, if they vote for that in that majority, it becomes the law of the land, just as Article 7 made the 9 states ratifying the Constitution the law of those 9 states. That's the dynamic of what's involved. So here are the steps. 1, people have to understand what their powers are, what they are, and the best way to do that is to look at the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and compare the 2. Then the next thing they need to do is to be able to have a group of people that will present a proposal written out in detail to the American people. Now, the American people will vote or not vote for this based upon the level of integrity, the level of honesty that the proposal is presented in. So now, if the people do not have any confidence in the ability in the law that's being presented to them, if they don't understand it, if they don't support it, then it goes nowhere. But if they understand it and vote for it, it becomes the law of the land. And that's the dynamic of what's going on within the book. And so it's important to understand that that you and I can decide to have a national election. And if enough people vote for it, that instills that national election with the integrity of its enactment. In other words, if the people don't vote for it in a sufficient number, then it goes nowhere. So for the people to vote for it, they first have to understand it, which is what I'm advocating, that people need to read the book, discuss it, and understand it. And once they understand it, then a group of people can put forth the legislation in a national election. And if sufficient number of people vote for that, based upon the fact that they understand it, that they see the integrity, they see the transparency, uh, and they see that the national election that I'm talking about is better than any election that's ever been conducted by any government in the world. So that's the dynamic of what happens. So it's the people voting to empower themselves as lawmakers and to do that with total transparency that then makes it. See, the key, the in the constitutional amendment, the first section that deals with the people voting to their powers that exist in them. The second is a section that lays out the fact that the people vote, that the election that's being conducted by the Philadelphia 2 group, the fact that they're conducting the election and the people vote for it means that the people buy into the process of the election. That's essentially what happened with Article 7 of the Constitution, creating our government, and we're doing the same thing. But what's important is that the integrity, the honesty, the transparency of the Philadelphia 2 election has to be above reproach, because the people will buy into it if they understand its transparency. If it doesn't, if it has the same transparency as government elections, like we see the efforts to suppress voting repeatedly, sustained by the courts, if that's the way the Philadelphia 2 group conducts the election, it's going nowhere.
Well, I think that's the biggest challenge, because, we live, right now in the contemporary United States, with the way our elections are now, half the country doesn't vote. So, how would we go about just kind of breaking through that wall and getting people to gather around something like this?
Well, Ron, here again, it's a voluntary kind of deal. If you and I and let's say 20 other people got together and took the text of and we would review the text and then present this text to voters of their own volition. And if enough voters vote for the text, it becomes the law.
Mm-hmm.
So the process is very straightforward. In other words, somebody has to put the text together, which is what I've done, and it should be reviewed by a group that's going to conduct a national election. And once they've reviewed it and they've bought the text, that's the text they now present to the American people to vote on. Once the voting starts, you can't change the text. But once the voting is complete, the text becomes the law of the land. That's the difficulty to understand the dynamic of what's going on. And as I rewrite the book to go to publish, which we'll have out in 3 or 4 weeks, I'll treat at length the comparison between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And I think when people understand that comparison, they'll be able to see that the founders in 1787 in the convention in Philadelphia, who did not consult the people. In fact, the convention was held in secret, and that the convention came forward with the establishment of slavery for perpetuity. You compare that to the Declaration of Independence, and hopefully that will wake people up to then pursue further how they can vote for a legislature of the people, and it would be entirely legal and proper once enacted, and it becomes the law of the land. Then once the people can now make laws and change the government, then you'll obviously see an improvement in the government. Otherwise, the people will do away with certain institutions. And then once the people start making laws, they can address these issues that, of course, representative government can't begin to address. The simple one being the the uh, the, the, the college, well, name escapes me. Senior moment. I'm 90 years old.
It's okay. It's okay. Take your time.
Well, you know the way we run elections.
Electoral college, or
Electoral college.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
electoral college is ridiculous.
Absolutely.
Here, I can cite you 5 ridiculous things that the founders put into the Constitution, which are totally egregious and are not democratic and do not help the American people. The first one, they established that a black person is 3/5 of a person for denominating the membership of the House of Representatives and for the election of the president with the Electoral College. That's the first thing. Now that was corrected with the Civil War, but of course the Civil War did not correct the ills of slavery. They just transferred it into other forms of discrimination. But the next thing that they put in was Article 5, which gave monopoly to elected officials, our representatives, gave them a monopoly to make laws and to change the government. Yeah. People couldn't do that, but your elected officials could. And then the next thing that they did after that is to create the United States Senate, which I served in. It's a very undemocratic body. We represent geography rather than human beings. So there you go, 3/5 of a person, the Electoral College, the Senate, and the next one is, of course, the establishment that elections are held by local and state government, which means that they control the federal establishment. And that, of course, brought up the whole issue. And that was done to protect slavery. So now you have the 4 elements: Electoral College, Article 5, the Senate, and the control of elections at the state and local government. Look at the mess we're in right now. We're having elections all over the United States, and every state is different. And within states, there are differences. And so there's no constant continuity. Compare that to the government of South Korea, where you have one institution that conducts all elections. And of course, it has a greater deal of integrity and consistency and uniformity. We don't have any of that. And the reason why we don't is because the powers at the state and local level wanted to protect the institution of slavery and guarantee its use.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your